There is a moment that quietly unsettles most men. She used to respond quickly. She seemed warm, engaged, present. And then she doesn't. Messages slow down. Energy shifts. Silence stretches longer than expected. Your mind starts filling in the gaps, and a subtle unease sets in because something feels different, but you can't name it yet. And before we go any further, if conversations like this help you understand yourself and relationships more clearly, gently tap like and subscribe. Not for the algorithm, but so you don't miss what most men were never taught about emotional dynamics. Now, here's what's important to understand early. Not all distance is rejection, and not all silence means disinterest. In female psychology, especially when genuine emotional attachment begins to form, behavior doesn't always become louder. Sometimes it becomes quieter, more contained, more deliberate. And for men who were taught that attraction always looks enthusiastic and obvious, this can be deeply confusing. When a woman starts to feel something real, not surface-level interest, but emotional gravity, she often becomes more internally conflicted. Attraction creates vulnerability. Vulnerability activates self-protection, and self-protection can look like emotional restraint. So when she ignores you but does something specific at the same time, that contrast matters more than the silence itself. You see, emotionally intelligent women don't always chase when they care. They observe. They pull back slightly to regulate their emotions. They create space not to punish you, but to understand themselves. And during that space, their actions, subtle, quiet, easily missed, often reveal far more than constant communication ever could. Many men misinterpret this phase. They panic. They overtext. They try to reestablish control through effort. And ironically, that reaction often disrupts the very attraction that was forming naturally. What's happening psychologically is simple, but rarely explained. When attraction deepens, a woman becomes more sensitive to who you are when she is not actively engaging you. She watches how you handle uncertainty. She notices whether your sense of self collapses without her attention. And she feels, not logically, but emotionally, whether your presence is stable or dependent. Pulling back slightly while still showing intentional signals feels safe. This is where most men miss the signal. They focus on what stopped instead of what started. And in the next sections, I'm going to help you recognize the exact behavior that often appears during this phase, the one that quietly indicates emotional attachment rather than withdrawal. Because once you understand this pattern, you stop chasing reassurance, and you start becoming the man whose calm presence naturally draws her closer. When a woman begins to fall emotionally, one of the first things that changes is how she pays attention, not how often. And this distinction is critical. She may ignore casual messages, delay replies, or seem less available on the surface. But at the same time, she starts tracking you in quieter ways. She remembers details you didn't emphasize. She notices patterns in your behavior. She references things you mentioned weeks ago, not because she's trying to impress you, but because her mind is already making room for you. This is not accidental. This is selective emotional focus. In female psychology, emotional attachment activates a filtering process. A woman becomes less reactive and more evaluative. She stops responding out of politeness or momentum and begins responding out of meaning. That's why random check-ins might get ignored, while a thoughtful message, a grounded presence, or a moment of authenticity receives a deeper response. Here's what many men misunderstand. Interest doesn't always show up as eagerness. Sometimes it shows up as restraint. When she starts to care, she becomes more cautious with her emotional exposure. She wants to feel you, not consume you. So she creates distance, not to escape, but to sense whether your energy remains consistent without her constant participation. And during this phase, one behavior quietly stands out. She finds subtle reasons to stay connected without demanding attention. She might view your stories consistently without reacting. She might initiate conversation about something specific, then disappear again. She might send something meaningful rather than frequent. This is not confusion. This is regulation. She is testing emotional safety, not through manipulation, but through observation. She wants to know if your identity remains intact when she is not actively validating you. Because emotional maturity, from her perspective, is revealed during silence, not closeness. If a woman ignores you and checks in later with intention, that contrast is powerful. It means she is not trying to detach. She is pacing herself. And here's where your response matters more than anything you say. Men who react with pressure unintentionally communicate insecurity. Men who remain grounded communicate emotional leadership. When you don't chase the silence, when you don't punish it, when you don't collapse into over-explanation, you become emotionally legible, predictable in the best way, safe without being passive. This is when attraction deepens quietly. She begins to associate you with calm rather than tension, presence rather than demand, strength rather than urgency. And over time, that emotional imprint matters more than constant conversation ever could. Understanding this dynamic doesn't make you distant. It makes you centered. And a centered man doesn't need to ask where he stands, because his stability answers that question for her. There is another subtle shift that appears when a woman is emotionally invested, but regulating her feelings. And it's one most men completely overlook. She starts mirroring your emotional rhythm, not your availability. This means she may not match your response speed, but she begins to align with your energy. If you're calm, she stays calm. If you're grounded, she softens. If you're consistent, she relaxes. This is not coincidence. It's an unconscious process rooted in emotional bonding. When a woman is not interested, she disengages fully. Her attention scatters. Her presence becomes generic. But when she's falling and trying not to rush herself, she stays emotionally tuned in, even while physically or digitally distant. You'll notice this in how she responds when she does engage. Her messages carry more substance. Her questions become more personal, but not invasive. She responds to your perspective, not just your words. This is a sign of emotional attunement, and it only happens when someone matters. Female psychology prioritizes emotional coherence over frequency. A woman doesn't need constant interaction to feel connected. What she needs is emotional continuity. And when she senses that continuity with you, she becomes more thoughtful about how she shows up. This is why she may ignore surface-level interactions, but lean in during moments that reveal character. If you speak about something meaningful, she listens. If you share a grounded opinion, she remembers. If you handle uncertainty with composure, she feels it. And here's the part most men misunderstand. Her silence is not an invitation for you to perform. It's an opportunity for you to remain yourself without external reinforcement. Emotionally mature women are deeply sensitive to how a man behaves when nothing is being demanded of him. They watch whether he becomes anxious, resentful, withdrawn, or steady. Not consciously, but emotionally. If she ignores you and later engages with warmth and depth, it often means she was never gone. She was observing, not to judge you harshly, but to feel whether being close to you would feel peaceful or chaotic. And peace is profoundly attractive. Men who rush to fill silence often disrupt this process. They unknowingly replace curiosity with pressure. But men who allow space without disengaging create emotional polarity without force. You don't need to withdraw. You don't need to chase. You don't need to change who you are. You simply remain consistent. And consistency, when paired with calm, communicates emotional reliability, something far rarer than charm or intensity. When a woman begins to associate you with emotional steadiness rather than emotional noise, her attachment doesn't spike dramatically. It deepens quietly. And quiet depth is the kind of attraction that lasts. At this stage, something even more telling begins to happen, and it's not in her words, but in her timing. When a woman is falling but holding herself back emotionally, she often reaches out at moments that are psychologically significant, not socially convenient. She doesn't message just to fill boredom. She appears when something shifts inside her, after reflection, after distance, after emotional processing. This is why her contact may feel unexpected. She might reappear after a period of silence with a thoughtful question. She might check in when you didn't prompt her. She might respond with depth when you assumed the connection had faded. This pattern matters because it signals intention without dependency. In female psychology, timing reveals emotional priority. When someone occupies mental space, they surface during moments of internal quiet, late evenings, reflective mornings, or transitional emotional states. Not because she's lonely, but because she's emotionally available in that moment. And here's the key distinction. She doesn't demand reassurance when she reaches out. She doesn't ask where she stands. She simply reconnects, calmly, naturally. That's not avoidance. That's emotional pacing. A woman who is uninterested avoids re-entry. A woman who is emotionally conflicted but attached allows herself small, controlled reconnections. These moments help her regulate closeness without overwhelming herself. This is where many men unintentionally fail the test. They respond with intensity that doesn't match the moment. They seek clarity too soon. They try to lock the connection down emotionally. But emotional attraction doesn't deepen under pressure. It deepens under alignment. When you respond to her reappearance with grounded presence rather than emotional urgency, you communicate something powerful. That closeness with you feels spacious, not consuming. You don't interrogate the silence. You don't reward it with overinvestment. You simply engage, warm, steady, unreactive. That response teaches her nervous system something important, that being close to you doesn't cost her autonomy, and autonomy is essential for genuine desire. This is why emotionally secure men don't need to decode every pause. They trust the rhythm of connection because their sense of self doesn't hinge on constant validation. And when a woman feels that kind of emotional freedom around a man, attachment doesn't feel like a loss of control. It feels like safety. Safety doesn't rush. Safety doesn't chase. Safety invites. And when safety becomes associated with you, her emotional pull toward you strengthens, even when she says very little. Because what she feels in your presence matters more than how often she speaks. Now let's talk about the behavior that confuses men the most. Because it seems contradictory on the surface, but psychologically, it's one of the strongest indicators of emotional attachment. She creates boundaries, but keeps you inside them. When a woman is indifferent, she leaves doors open out of politeness and slowly disappears. When she's emotionally invested but self-aware, she does the opposite. She limits access, but not connection. She narrows the space, not to exclude you, but to protect what's forming. You might notice this when she becomes selective about how and when you interact. She may not be constantly available, but when she is, she's present, focused, emotionally engaged. The interaction feels intentional rather than habitual. This is not emotional distance. Female psychology is deeply tied to emotional safety. When feelings intensify, a woman instinctively manages exposure. She doesn't want to give too much too fast, not because she's playing a game, but because she's listening to her internal boundaries. And here's the part that matters most. She still prioritizes emotional integrity with you. She may clarify misunderstandings gently. She may express discomfort without hostility. She may pull back from chaos, but lean towards stability. If she ignores you and corrects rather than discards the connection, that's significant. It means you matter enough to be handled with care. Indifference doesn't correct. Indifference disengages. A woman who is falling wants the connection to remain clean, balanced, and emotionally respectful. She wants to feel that closeness with you won't erode her sense of self, or yours. This is why she may say no more often, why she may slow things down, why she may assert space. And paradoxically, those boundaries are often what allow attraction to deepen safely. Men who respect these boundaries without withdrawing communicate maturity. They show that their interest isn't conditional on access. It's grounded in self-respect. This creates emotional polarity without pressure. You don't chase permission. You don't resent limitation. You remain steady. And that steadiness sends a clear psychological message that you are emotionally regulated, not reactive. For many women, this is the moment attraction shifts from curiosity to trust. Because trust isn't built through constant availability. It's built through consistent character. When a woman feels that your presence doesn't threaten her boundaries, that it actually honors them, her emotional investment strengthens naturally. Not dramatically, not impulsively, but deeply. And deep attachment is quiet, deliberate, and hard to shake. At this point, the dynamic reaches a subtle but decisive turning point, one that reveals whether her silence was emotional regulation or emotional withdrawal. She begins to reveal herself in small, unguarded moments, not through grand confessions, not through dramatic vulnerability, but through brief, honest disclosures that slip through when she feels safe. She might mention something personal, without framing it as important. She might share a concern, a pressure, or a private thought casually. She might let you see uncertainty without asking you to fix it. This is not accidental. In female psychology, emotional disclosure follows safety, not attraction. A woman can be attracted to many men, but she only allows emotional exposure with those she trusts. And trust develops when she feels emotionally held, not emotionally chased. If she ignores you at times, but opens up in these small ways, it's a strong signal that her feelings are present and deepening. Because indifference doesn't soften, indifference doesn't reveal, indifference stays guarded. This phase is where many men unknowingly sabotage connection by trying to do something with the vulnerability instead of simply holding it. They offer solutions too quickly. They minimize feelings to stay strong. They shift focus back to themselves. But emotional safety grows when a woman feels heard without being managed. When you respond with calm acknowledgement, not intensity, not detachment, you communicate emotional fluency. You show that her inner world is welcome without being overwhelming. This doesn't make you passive, it makes you present. And presence is profoundly stabilizing. When she experiences you as someone who can hold emotional space without collapsing or controlling, her nervous system relaxes further. The push-pull dissolves. The need to regulate through distance decreases. You'll notice her consistency slowly increase, not dramatically, but steadily. Her tone softens. Her engagement feels warmer. Her silence feels less charged. This is not because you pursued her. It's because you gave her emotional permission to move closer at her own pace. Emotionally mature women don't fall for pressure. They fall into safety. And safety is built through repeated experiences of calm, respectful connection, especially during moments of uncertainty. If she ignored you but allowed you access to her inner thoughts, even briefly, that's not mixed signals. That's trust forming. And trust is the quiet foundation beneath lasting attraction, the kind that doesn't need constant reassurance to survive. Now we arrive at the final and most important truth, the one that ties everything together. When a woman ignores you, but continues to emotionally orient toward you, the real question is not what she feels. It's who you become in the absence of her attention. Because attraction at this level is no longer about chemistry. It's about emotional gravity. If she is falling, she is not asking whether you want her. She is feeling whether you are anchored in yourself. This is why the men who experience the deepest, most enduring attraction are not the ones who chase clarity, but the ones who embody it. They don't demand consistency before offering it. They don't seek reassurance before giving calm. They don't confuse silence with loss of value. They remain emotionally intact. And this integrity creates a powerful internal response in her. Because when a woman senses that your sense of self does not fluctuate with her presence or absence, something shifts inside her. She relaxes into closeness rather than managing it. She allows attachment rather than controlling it. She moves toward you without fear of being consumed. This is the behavior that matters more than any signal she sends. If she ignored you but stayed emotionally aligned, if she pulled back but reconnected with intention, if she created space but protected the bond, then her silence was never about pushing you away. It was about seeing whether you would abandon yourself trying to reach her. And when you don't, when you stay grounded, respectful, and emotionally steady, you answer the question she never asked out loud. You show her that closeness with you feels safe, not exciting in a chaotic way, not intense in a draining way, but secure. And secure attachment doesn't announce itself dramatically. It settles in quietly. It deepens over time. So if you find yourself confused by her silence, don't rush to interpret it. Instead, observe who you are becoming in that space. Because the man who remains centered, self-respecting, and emotionally present, even without constant validation, is the man a woman feels safe falling for. And that kind of attraction doesn't fade easily.